Morning. That's working? Yeah, no light, but it's working. And I'm told, unlike last time, we don't have to turn off for somebody else to speak. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee. First item is apologies and declarations of interest. We have apologies from Councillor Wilson, New Zealand, being represented by Councillor Atkins. Apologies from Councillor Brown, United States, being represented by Ambrose Smith. And we have two other apologies. Councillor Ali has stepped down from his role because he's changed parties. So there's a Peterborough post is vacant and there's no substitute, and that will be worked on. And we have also had apologies from Councillor Harvey, no substitute. But we are quorate, which is the most important thing. Could we have declarations of interest for any item on the agenda? Okay. No, and sorry, I should have at the beginning. This is a meeting that's open to the public and is being recorded. Okay, I'll now move on to item 2, which are the chair's announcements. I've got something to read out in particular. On Tuesday, the 24th of January, the Combined Authority was notified by the Levelling Up Department in London of a best value notice. And members of the committee will know that we were sent an email by the Chief Exec on Tuesday notifying them of us of that. The notice clarified more formally Whitehall's concerns already shared with the Combined Authority following the external auditors Ernst & Young's letter, which they issued to me, in fact, on the 1st of June last year. The letter highlighted significant concerns regarding the governance of the organisation and the need to engage with the department to provide assurance of improvement. And there was a press release, is on the website, and I noticed it had been reported in some of the local newspapers. And I think when we get to the improvement item on the agenda, we might wish to understand the implications of this letter. And the other announcement concerns member behaviour, lessons learned review. Now, this was due to come to this meeting, but has been withdrawn. The monitoring officer felt that it would not have been an effective report, as there are many things that cannot be disclosed at present. We have therefore agreed that this item, how we learn from these experiences, will come to a later meeting after the code of conduct issues have been concluded. That completes my announcements. So going on to item 3, which is the draft minutes and the action log. We have the minutes of the 2nd of December meeting last year, and the extra meeting that we held on the 13th of January this year. Are there any comments on those sets of minutes as a record? I'll take that as done. We did have, and this puts us all to shame, Councillor Brown in America was sitting in an airport lounge with not much to do. So he looked at the papers for our meeting and provided me with some feedback. I told him he was a glutton for punishment, but the feedback was helpful. But one item, which I don't think we'll have amended, but I think it returns to the point, and I'll ask officers to take this into account, is the confusion over the terminology between the Combined Authority and the Combined Authority Board, rather than the board and the CA board. Now, this is not, I don't think there's any point going backwards on the editorial, but we did, when we discussed the Constitution earlier in the month, we did find the inconsistency about the naming of elements of the organisation could lead to confusion. So I just remind officers that they need to be particularly vigilant to make sure there's clarity, because the difficulty is, we all know, people who write stuff, is you've got your own mindset and you've got to see what the other person interprets it. So that was helpful for an airport. I tell him to go and have a nice holiday. And right. So, and I think in the action log, everything is done. Good. Yeah.
Could I just make a general comment, please, on the content of the two sets of minutes? Because within that, there is a resolution in our work programme, page 5, which is resolution 2, which refers to this committee's role in the improvement journey. And there's a further reference where it talks about the Independent Improvement Board giving this committee their opinion concerning the improvement work. And there was also in the reference in the internal audit progress report about the relationship with Performance and Risk Committee. And again, there was to be a relationship between that committee and this committee. So as things progress through the improvement journey, we're now building up quite a network of communications between all the different elements of governance that are concerned with improvement. And I think it would be helpful if this was mapped and it was made clear what information we're expecting, what information different parties are expecting to provide to A&G, and what information we're expecting to receive and what we're supposed to going to be doing about it, so that we can properly fulfill our role in the improvement journey. Because I think it's rapidly evolving, and I think if we don't have an overview of the helicopter view of this, I think it's going to be quite difficult to understand who's doing what, when, and so on and so forth. So I think I really appreciate clarity on that point.
Thank you. Do you want to come back to that when we do the improvement item, which is, if that's a sort of introduction improvement item, because that's next, because I do think, before we move on to item 4, that we need to have in our minds where we sit in all of this. But if we can, that concludes item 3. That was an opening bit to the improvement framework. And we have joining us online Angela Probert, who leads on the improvement program. We've got the chief executive, the governance improvement lead, and the improvement plan program manager is also available. So I think we've got, and I'm grateful for them all attending, so that we can address it in the round, including the points that you've just made. And I think what when you introduce it, Angela, or when we get into discussion, I think 3 things I noted was a sort of value added. We need to have in mind where the Audit and Governance Committee actually adds value, and we need to perhaps understand the best value letter. And I couldn't find in the papers, but I know that the Improvement Board's had its first meeting, so maybe you could say a little to us about that. So that's just to add to all the other things you've got. Do you want to introduce the paper now, actually?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair. I'm just looking to the Chief Exec and whether you would wish to say anything about the letter before I give an update, on the report, but also address the issues that have been raised through the Chair in terms of the role of the A&G. Gordon.
Chair, do you want me to start there with the best value notice? Or
whichever way you feel it fits in. I mean, I think we've all read the notice. I think it's comprehending its implications is, I think, probably would be helpful to us.
Okay.
Whether that's done now or
probably should, because it does relate to other questions. Then, I mean, this all came. So clearly, we circulated the notice to. I guess I'm checking that we did send the notice to all members here, so everyone has seen it. And did we circulate our statement that we issued at the same time? Which I think we did. Okay, so the background to let me say something about the background and what we understand and how we understand that. The background, there's two elements to pick up. One is the general intent and interest of government in considering the effectiveness and performance of a range of local government related authorities. So through general knowledge, I'm sure all members understand that over the last several years, government has decided to intervene quite directly in some councils to the extent of requiring teams to go in and make an assessment, and in some cases then appointing commissioners who take some of the powers from that authority as a way of driving and contributing to improvement. That's really been a set of ad hoc actions. There actually isn't a framework in which those things happen. They've rather built up as some element of practice in different places. And people will know that in the case of the CPCA, there was quite a bit of communication about issues of concern. One from the external auditor in June, and second, one letter from DLUC a little bit after that, saying they were taking note of all those issues in the external auditor's letter, and withholding a proportion of the tail end of one particular funding stream pending assurance about all these issues. So the generic point is this introduction of something called a best value notice, which I and lots of other people hadn't heard of until Tuesday evening this week. Just the mechanism is I think best seen as an attempt by government to codify how it might get involved with any authority where it has concerns, rather than just there being a wide gap between relatively informal discussions and highly interventionist decisions. So I think that's a change in government, which I think is to be welcomed. In our particular case, this letter, I think in the main, is a regularization of the understandings that we have through some of the things are being expressed as letters to the authority over some years. This is clearly not a set of issues that are just very recent. And so they refer in the letter to letters to the first mayor that were sent several years ago about partnerships and attitude. And they clearly, in describing performance, when Angela and I met the civil servants on late Tuesday afternoon, when we tried to tease out what was behind some of the statements, in performance, they clearly related to some issues in the last that we've all become aware of in the last year, but also to issues that were raised with the authority 3 years ago around housing. So I think the headline is, this is a new form of communication and clarification. It's non-statutory. but it is a form of communication that seeks to give clarity, I think, on both sides about the perspective of government and the expectations of government. In our particular case, there is nothing new here. These are all issues that have been identified either in earlier letters, that were identified also in the assessment report that went to board in October, and have been identified for action in our improvement plan. And the letter from government acknowledges that the combined authority has undertaken that assessment and put in place an appropriate improvement plan. I think the one thing that is slightly different is that now that we have established an independent improvement board, I think this letter creates a clearer role for that board in relation to DLUC. So it clearly now sets out the understanding that they will not just communicate with us, but they will seek to maintain a channel of communication with the Independent Improvement Board, particularly through the chair. And that's been developing over the last month or two. And Lord Kerslake had discussions with officials. I can't remember whether it was before Christmas or just after, but certainly in preparation for the first meeting. So it codifies that as well. So I think it does help clarify their view of the role of the Independent Improvement Board. And that's, in the main, I mean, although the issues are serious, actually they're the same issues that we know we're dealing with. And we've been clear about that for the last 2.5 months. So I think that's where we're at with this. We didn't see it any draft in advance. I got notice on Tuesday evening an email that we would be receiving something called best value notice the next day. Angela and I met with the civil servants late Tuesday afternoon, just about the same time that they published the letter. And we're still in dialogue to try and clarify on a couple of those dimensions exactly what it is they think they refer to, and we're pursuing that. And is that enough on that, Chair?
I think that brings it to life in a way which you couldn't get from the words. And I notice there's no pass mark.
No, that's one of the things that we're trying to establish, that these aren't just issues that we look for incidents to stick to them. Sometimes that is as a risk. Yeah.
Do members want to make any comments before we get Angela carries on with the report? Councillor Atkins.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question for me. Do you have a sense of why they've chosen this moment to issue this letter? The triggers that it specifies are 6-7 months ago and 3 years, in terms of the external auditor's intervention, and referencing letters written 3 years before that. So do you have any sense as to why they've picked, why didn't they write this letter in, say, August or September? Why have they held off until now? Is there something concerning them, or do they think that, have they tried to align it with the establishment of the improvement board? Do you have any sense of that?
I am tempted to say that's a rhetorical question, but and I comment rather than anything else. There are various perspectives on why on earth that should happen right now. I mean, all I can say is that they took three actions at the same time, and were announced at the same time. One was in relation to Thurrock, where they announced that they were ratcheting up the level of formal intervention. They were increasing the powers to commissioners. Second was to Middlesbrough, where there is a directly elected mayor. It's not a combined authority, but a direct, if you remember, under a previous regime, there were a number of directly elected mayors who were really leaders of council, where there's been, I gather, a range of personal and governance disputes that have arisen in the last 12 months or so. And the third is to us. So as a lowly officer, I wouldn't want to imbue any particular motives to all of this, other than they've now decided to codify these types of actions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, Angela, do you want to now go ahead with your paper?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I will include and come on to some of the points that have been raised this morning already with regards to the A&G and the IIB. But first of all, just in terms of the report that you've been that you have as part of the agenda, it is the report that was presented to the CA board this week. And the report was received positively by the board. And what I would say, Chair, is there is still a lot to do. But it's important to note that we have made progress across all areas of the improvement programme. And indeed, there were a number of reports on the board agenda this week, or indeed that were prepared for board that were deferred. And just to give A&G just some sort of examples of the areas of progress, you will see that the draft corporate plan and values have been agreed, and this is a really important step and a key element in the golden thread for the combined authority. It's something that we haven't had before, but what it does is it sets out clearly our ambition, our priorities, but also how we will operate. And these will now be embedded through business and service plans, and indeed the setting of individual objectives for staff. So it's a really key step. The staffing structure for the Office of the Mayor has been agreed, and the recruitment has been undertaken throughout November and December, and some staff have either already started or are due to start during February. The executive team senior structure has been agreed, and the recruitment has commenced for 2 executive director roles. And the final stage of that is taking place over the next 2 or 3 weeks. Work is being undertaken also on the start of the recruitment process for the chief exec role. So progress is being made on recruitment to those most senior posts in officer posts in the combined authority. Members will be aware, members of A&G will be aware that governance proposals have been drafted and the recommendations set out in a board report. And because of the agenda this week, that report has been deferred to the next board meeting, but the work has been done and it is ready to go to board, hopefully for agreement. Also agreed, Chair, are the draft values for the combined authority, which again are an important step in how we behave, what we expect of each other, both as officers but also members, and they are contained in the corporate plan that was presented and agreed in at board this week. Just a couple of other key areas of progress. Workshop with the business board has taken place, and the outputs from that workshop are being considered and will be presented hopefully at the next meeting to the CA board. So again, progress is being made. And the draft bus strategy is prepared, and you may be aware that consultation began at the beginning of January on that. Chair, also to note in terms of the how we are doing this, how we are engaging with key stakeholders. Chief executives from across constituent councils are very involved in the above activity, both supporting, giving us some challenge, but also leading some of the activity. And I would again stress that their contribution is very much valued and needed. And in terms of progress reported this month, where changes for timelines for delivery have been recommended to change, this has been done in conjunction with the chief exec sponsors, because it's important, and it's certainly their view, that our focus needs to be on delivering real and sustained improvement, not just preparing and ticking things off. So, Chair, I don't know whether you want me to stop there before I just update you on the IIB in terms of an update on improvement to this committee.
I think it might be helpful if you gave us the update on the IIB so
That's
we can
fine.
see where they've reached before we
Okay.
have an open discussion.
That's fine. So the IIB induction day took place in mid-December, and all board members, CA board members and chief execs were involved in the morning through a range of conversations, and this enabled them share their perspectives and their insights, and some honest conversations took place. Board members and chief execs left following lunch, and that enabled the IIB in the afternoon to reflect on what they'd heard, but also look and start to determine its areas for potential focus going forward. And a note was prepared, a confidential note that is currently with the chair in terms of what came out of that conversation in the afternoon. We've also made progress on the IIB meetings, and IIB meetings will take place bi-monthly, and we now have in place meetings for the next 12 months. And that is a good place to be because it gives us a structure for the conversations. And on the induction day, IIB members agreed that they would have follow-up conversations with a range of key stakeholders. And IIB members are currently putting those in place. And Chair, I am sure they will involve both yourself and the chair of overview and scrutiny. So in terms of their specific focus, how they would wish to use their meetings, how they link then with the ANG in terms of reporting, and indeed, as Gordon has shared with regards to the reporting up to DULUC, we will through the next month work with the IIB to get that clarity. So the chair of the IIB in terms of the role the IIB needs to take and its interaction with both yourselves, but also DULUC can be confirmed. So a good positive meeting, and the actions and areas for focus are currently with the IIB to confirm and communicate.
Thank you. Just I always get confused between biannual and every year or every other year. So what is it? Bi-monthly?
Oh,
is
sorry,
every
did
month?
I say biannual? So
No,
no,
bi-monthly
bi-monthly.
you said. Did you mean, is that every other month or twice a month?
Every other month.
Okay, fine.
Every other month they will meet.
Okay,
Yes.
that's helpful. Colleagues, we had the earlier statement from Simon regarding now that all these new lines of communication having some insight to the mapping of how this will work. I don't know whether you wanted to say more on that, Simon, or what comments from other colleagues around the table.
I'll give colleagues some thinking time. I'll fill gap. There's a reference in this report. I think it's at section 3.8, which gives the committee some guidance. Well, I thought it was there. Can't find it. It basically, what it basically says is the highlights reports. So does it give us so the key lines of inquiry to provide feedback to the improvement group required? So this talks about having an overall oversight of performance, key risks, and next steps. And so when we kind of building up and clarifying what it is that's expected of us and what we expect of all the various other parties that are involved in the improvement program, this is a particular building block, but we really do need to have that clarity, and whether the highlights report is going to give us sufficient information to fulfil that role. A further question I've got arising from this is the external auditor satisfied that the 6 key themes align with the value for money issues which they set out in their letter, and specifically their reporting criteria around financial sustainability, governance, improving economy efficiency and effectiveness, and further the questions of governance relating to senior leadership capacity and staff safeguarding. Because it's clear we're taking an exam here. We're not sure about the marking regime, and we're not sure about the marking or the grading boundaries, which we'll know whether or not we've passed, and we'll be relieved of the best value notice and fit for purpose for receipt of further government funding, because that's the destination we need to arrive at. It's not quite clear what that destination, what the criteria are for achieving that destination. I think we need clarity of that.
Are there any other comments before I ask for reaction to that, or because it's better to bundle up our comments and then we can see which paths on. Michael.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think just to follow on from Councillor Smith's comments there, if I'm reading this correctly, on page 27 of our packs, the Chief Executive has outlined it's quite a helpful paragraph 6.1 saying, what would success look like? And perhaps following on from those comments, is there buy-in from other key stakeholders, such as DLUC, that this is indeed, that this is a kind of an appropriate way to think about what success looks like, and that if we achieved, well, perhaps all might be optimistic, but if we achieved most of these things and we're on track to achieve the rest, do we have confidence that DLUC would look at that and say, this is an organisation that's turned itself around and no longer needs either formal or informal intervention? The other comment I just want to make very briefly is that we are being asked whether we can provide assurance, if I've read this correctly. We're asked whether audit and governance can provide assurance to the board that the improvement framework will satisfy DLUC and the external auditors. Sorry, this is back on page 18 in section 3. I'm not quite sure how we can assure either ourselves or the board that what we're doing will satisfy DLUC, because we don't have a particularly direct relationship or opportunity to question them. We can ask the external auditors later when we have them on our agenda what their view on the improvement framework is, but I'm not sure. I'm not necessarily sure that it's our role to try and guess whether DLUC will be satisfied. That's more a question we ask you than vice versa, I would suggest. And then the second bullet point, to assure ourselves and the board that improvement is on track. My sense is it's going to be difficult to do that when we have 6 kind of key themes, only one of which is rated green, which is what you've told us is your metric for on track. So at a kind of very basic level, 1/6 of the program is currently on track and 5/6 of it is at some risk of not being on track. So again, I don't feel necessarily that we're going to be able to provide a great deal of assurance in that regard. But perhaps I've slightly misunderstood what you were expecting of this committee.
Can I just comment on that before we take any more questions? I mean, because this wording did appear previously, and I think we concluded at the time that we can't answer those questions. And back to what is the role of the Audit and Governance Committee, because our job is not to make the decisions for the organisation. It is our job is the governance in place? Is it working effectively? And are there weaknesses in it that have been identified, and the ones that have been identified, are they being actioned appropriately? But that's for the combined authority convince the audit committee, not for the audit committee to. I don't think we are competent to say is it the required level of oversight and performance. I suppose the heart of it in my mind is where we're adding value and whether we've reached a juncture where we ought to rethink, given the improvement board is in place, a different way of where we sit in this. Because there's a conundrum, I suppose, in the sense that the Audit and Governance Committee is an avenue to the public to make all this transparent, whereas I think the Improvement Board is not an open to the public arrangement, which makes sense. On the other hand, we just don't want to duplicate the bureaucracy all the time when one knows that the CPCA is working flat out to recover the situation. So it needs to be a value added not only to the committee, but a value added, it seems to me, to the organisation. And maybe after we've had these discussions, there might be a time to take stock. So I see some nodding heads with my colleagues, so I think there's an in tune there. So that's one thing, and I think there's one other question, and then if you can, just like in charades, the whole thing, you can try and respond. Ian.
Thank you. Yeah. I don't think we've got the matrix to make the decision as to look at whether it's achieving. We very look as a committee, we look back over the history and the reports that come. And I think the proof of whether it is being delivered really comes down to the reports that will come back to us. And we haven't had the full reports yet to analyse this. It's still running a process. And I think at the moment, we put process in place, we put that in place, and we have to wait for the reports to come back from the internal and external auditors to tell us how this is, how it is performing. They will tell us whether this is working or not.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, if I just round that off and then pass all of that package back. I've been in trying to think of our role. We've got all the activities going on to address the issues, but we have to pass 2 exams which we don't know what the benchmark is, which is satisfy the external auditor, who is Delphic when you ask him, and to satisfy London in the way in which the chief exec made clear that you're trying to tease out what is the pass mark. So in the mix, is it helpful, would it be helpful for the Audit and Governance Committee to see something which marks progress against the things that were in the external auditor's letter and whatever, and the concerns of Whitehall, rather than trying to understand the intricacies of the improvement plan itself? I'm open-minded on this, but I just think we are at a juncture where we need to think about ways which are more effective. Right. Sorry about that, Angela, but could you help?
Gosh, yes. Okay. I think this is so my starting point on this is there is a lot going on in terms of different stakeholders, different asks, different exam questions, and we need to try and pull this together so that we have clarity on what that exam question is, but also to make sure that the activities that we're doing with the resources that are available are focusing on the right things to drive that improvement. Chair, a comment was made about outcomes that were set out and the test against those outcomes that the Chief Executive in the board report back in October set out, as this is potentially where progress should be seen after a 3-month period. And I think it's important now with the IIB being in place, but also now with the letter from Dulux, that we pull those elements together and through conversations with the department to try and get that clarity about what that pass mark might be, or in terms of what it is that they're looking for, so that we can stand back and, if I say reflect, I don't mean stop doing things, but just make sure that we're focusing on the things that will actually enable us make the progress that the board, that external observers, the IIB, and certainly other broad stakeholders want to see us make. So I think there is this point now the IIB are set up to actually pull those things together, because new things have come on the agenda since the chief exec set out in the report back in October. So I think that is an important step for us to do, and we will continue having conversations with Dulux with regards to that. Just picking up the point with regards to the RAG rating and whether or not we are making progress. The RAG rating process is very much that we set out in October what we intended to do and a timeline for delivering on that. And it's important that we are both honest and transparent with regards to where we are with improvement. And we are not saying we are not making progress. What we are saying is the original timeline that we set out for some of these activities has needed to be extended. And as I shared in my brief introduction, we've not done this just as a group of internal officers in the performance management team. We have sat down with the constituent chief executives who are sponsors of each of these areas and talked robustly about what we need to focus on and make sure that we have got the right activity in place. So, as I said earlier, we are making progress, but some things are absolutely to the timeline set. Others are slightly delayed, and that is why that is reflected in the RAG rating analysis that has been set out. In terms of the insurance that you are, as a committee, are looking to give, and how that links with the IIB, I think that is a conversation with the IIB with regards to the reporting that you would require and the assurance that you need. We set out with the reports that we are currently doing in a way to make the progress, to put information down in terms of progress against plan. We are content working with yourselves and also with the IIB to actually change or amend how that reporting is done so it meets what you need in terms of the level assurance that you would wish to give. I'll stop there in terms of any other comments that the chief executive might want to bring in.
Gordon, please.
Thanks, Chair. In addition to what Angela said, I think the way you phrased your final comment is probably right. I mean, we are just in reflection at the moment. I mean, both in, as you know, trying to get more clarity about the detail behind the headlines in the best value notice, so that we're clear, get as close as we can to understanding the exam question and criteria, rather than just assuming. But we are reflecting on that issue of best way to report, and Angela's focused on the improvement program reporting. And as she says, some of the issues there, I mean, they were never going to be all done by the end of 3 months. But when we brought the groups together and they have teased out different steps to implementation at every stage, some of the timelines go over many months. They're not, and that's just a reality. So on the first one, where the headline it was agreeing a strategic plan. I mean, that necessarily that's a first step. That took several months. It was agreed the other day. But of course, the implementation of that, if we're being rigorous,
Yeah.
The implementation clearly follows that. It's about further detail into service plans, individual objectives, and the necessary natural timetable for that is to work towards the 1st of April, the beginning of the next municipal year, having reset the performance management framework. That's really what we're doing. Now, that was never going to be done by January. Naturally, that needs to be done by the end of March. And we need to reframe some of these improvement lines to reflect the reality of implementation rather than just the first stage of work in a few cases, which is about setting the basis. Just linking back to your final comments, which I want to focus on, where you're trying to tease at this, where is the added value and where's the very particular role of audit and governance versus everything else? I think there are some things where you need to see the background. So progress against the plan monthly, the monthly progress reports against the improvement plan is part of that background, and you'll be able to see what's intended, what's being done, an assessment of chief execs about progress against that. I don't think it's for you to second test that. I think that is material for you. I think assurance that you're looking for, I think it's correct. Is the governance in place? Is the governance functioning properly? I.e., when things need to flex and change and there need to be subsequent interventions based on performance, is that happening? And I think your final suggestion, I think, is one that I'm attracted to, although it's, it's in a sense, it's another layer of work, but maybe it's just a sensible thing to do, which is if the exam question is meeting the questions raised in the letter from the external auditor and the themes identified in the best value notice, there is a certain logic to trying to report against those themes and what we're doing. Now, in some senses, that's a sort of recategorization of work, but on the other hand, if that's the way to get a bit more clarity, and for particularly you as the Audit and Governance Committee to be able to say, in seeking assurance against those external challenges, that's where you need to take assurance rather than just the generic progress of the improvement plan activity, which covers a very wide range of things. I mean, you will remember that I did try to address some of that in the letter to the external auditor in early December, but that wasn't every single issue. I mean, clearly one or two of the issues have timelines that are not completely in our control. But Chair, I think we should take that away, and unless we've got a good reason otherwise, that we report back to you against those items and themes. That seems sensible to me.
I sense, yeah. Could I, and I'm very grateful for those comments, because I think in the end, the CPCA has to get off the hook. And the only way they're going to get off the hook is passing enough exam questions by people who are not in this room. Well, we have external auditor here, but he won't answer that if I asked him what they were. If you look at what our competencies are as an audit committee, what we would normally do is, if we encountered or concerned about an area, we would have either the external auditor or most likely the internal auditor. We would commission them to go and have a look and then come back and tell us, are things working as they should? Those questions, and providing, and there should be a mechanism to us which gives their assurance or worry to us as to whether or not the exam questions are being answered. Because we as a group are not able, and we're not focused on just one subject. I mean, I know it's a huge subject, but it is one subject. So we don't have any competencies. We have to have agents who do the work for us. And is that what the improvement board is? I mean, I wouldn't be so presumptuous to say, well, we need Lord Kerslake at the end of the table to reassure us. But if that improvement board is working confidentially, this is the public forum where the results of that work can be made open, and we should be looking for the improvement board to answer those questions in 3.7 and 3.1. So I wondered if you could put that in the mix of coming back to the next A&G with a different approach, and I'd be very happy, and I'm sure members would be, to be consulted or to have quick chats between now and then, because we don't want to make worky, but we have got this public openness, and the only thing that matters is not how much activity, but whether you can pass the test. And none of this tells us that yet, does it? Or not none of it. Much of it doesn't tell us that. It just shows that every effort and sinew is being put into trying to solve the problem. But the people who've posed the problem have not articulated in a way that we know when we've crossed the line. So is that a sort of package that you could go and think about for our next meeting? Because we want to keep it simple too. We don't want I don't know how many stakeholders you've got. There's lists of them. There's loads of work for everybody. And the more we can reduce just repeating to another crowd, surely that's helpful in the sense of effectiveness for the team.
Yes, that's very helpful. That's very helpful, Chair. We'll certainly go away. We will have conversations with the chair of the IIB, and I'm sure there will be conversations directly with you via IIB members. But we will look at how we can do that and absolutely focus on the external test in terms of where we need to get through and how, either directly through the IIB or with the IIB, then you can be assured as a committee of the progress that is being made.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I've got one other from Simon.
I have to say, Chair, that was a masterful summary and an analysis of what needs to be done. So I'm grateful to you for that. I think it's best summed up as saying that it's actually the value for money test for this committee, and that's measured by its focus on its impact. So if I was going to add, I think there were 3 elements that the Chief Executive referred to, which was the monthly progress report, the assurance around governance being in place, is it working well, and the assurance about reporting against the themes raised by the external challenges. I think there's a 4th element, which is, what is the impact of this committee on that, from what it says and the guidance that it gives? In the last 2 meetings, we have given guidance to the board, and it's going to be very interesting to see whether or not there's been that guidance and advice has been taken notice of and acted on. And if it's not, then the questions raised is then, well, what's the value of this committee? Was it because the advice and guidance was no good? Was it because the agendas were too big for them to dwell on it? And if not, well, how can we do our job better to have impact in this process? So I think we need to be ensured that we are useful, adding value and having impact.
I've always measured in the 4.5 years or so that point, but there have been individual instances where we've made a recommendation to the CA board over and above the normal routine hygiene factors of the paperwork, and that's certainly, I've always been able to put in our report each year that when we've made a specific recommendation, it has been taken on, it's been acted upon by the CA board and the CPCA. Of course, there's much more complexity now. We are due for our next A&G meeting to look at the draft annual report of this turbulent, useful, exciting year, whereas hitherto it has been rather elegant swan stuff. So could I ask the officers who are going to draft the report for us, to take on board that point. Could they do an analysis, please, to when we've provided recommendations to the board, to the extent to which they've been taken into the mix? And we need to understand, if that didn't happen, there's a learning point for us, and perhaps there's a learning point from the process that we need feedback as a group when we make a recommendation and it's not accepted. I think my sense is they've always been accepted, but I think it would be good to map it for our report this year, because I'm not enjoying the thought of, and I'm sure the team aren't, of drafting a report which covers this last 12 months, that gets the balance right. But so I wouldn't put that at you, Angela, if you just concentrate on the other stuff. And I think we're very grateful both for for the insights and the candor, and I'm particularly grateful that the chief executive always joins us for the improvement phase, because it is important to us as a committee, and I think it's important in the transparency to the public that we can have these discussions, and for those who are interested, it's on the record. So thank you both. Be happy to move on. Thank you. That was 4. Can I find 5? This is the internal audit progress report, item 5. Dan, are you going to introduce it, or is there an officer to start?
No, I'm happy to do that, Chair.
Okay, then please do.
So if I may take you to page 58 of your pack, that is section 1, and I'll just talk through the key messages, because I think it's just important to sort of give you that overview. So as I've said there's no further update on the one remaining 21-22 draft report. We've issued one further final report from 22-23, so that is on risk management. A further draft report has been issued as well in relation to the current year programme. 2 further reviews are in progress, and all of the remaining audits have either started this week, one starts next week, and 2 further reviews commence in February. So whilst, as I think I said at your December meeting, there's obviously a big portion of work still to deliver in Q4, what this latest update shows you is we are on track to deliver that work over the next 2 months. We are also going to be in the throes of holding planning meetings over those 2 months for the coverage in the 23-24 plan, which will come to your next meeting. Obviously, you'll get sight of that and have the opportunity to input into the suggested coverage for the 23-24 plan. I'll just skip for the moment, if I may, and I'll come back to the findings on the risk management report. So I'll skip over page 59, but come back to that. I just wanted, whilst I was sort of on a roll in terms of the remainder of the plan, so page 61 just shows you the summary, obviously, of the remaining work and when that's scheduled. I've just touched upon that. The one change to the plan, again, it's in the report, but I think it's important because we did have some discussions on subsidiary companies at your December meeting, and I reflected on that and thought actually that would be one approach to using the succession planning budget to extend the sort of the breadth of that subsidiary company review. So we've agreed that with officers, and indeed that's one of the reviews that's imminently about to commence. So I'm happy to perhaps pause there before I just reflect on the risk management review, just in case there's any wider questions on the progress report paper, Chair.
I think we're happy to move on.
Okay, so in terms of the risk management report, obviously the one finalised since the last meeting, so that has concluded with a partial assurance opinion. So just a reminder that that's a negative opinion. 6 medium priority management actions have been agreed there. You may recall this was that the first time we looked at this was right at the end of our first year of appointment. So end of 2021, we issued a partial assurance opinion on the risk management arrangements. I think we'd agreed 7 medium, 1 low priority action at that time. So in summary, what we've said from the latest piece of work around risk management is that those actions that were agreed almost 2 years ago now, in the main, were all still in progress. So we couldn't see that that none had not received any attention. But what I wasn't satisfied with that was at the time of this review, and you can see, obviously, I think you requested previously, I've popped the debrief date in. So we clearly did this field work in September and October. So I realised that some of the progress that we were being advised was still scheduled to be made was due to happen in, for example, November and December. But nonetheless, at the time of our field work, though some of those things hadn't happened. So, for example, the provision of the risk management training hadn't happened, the development of the risk appetite hadn't been finalised, the updated risk management strategy hadn't been approved. And I think what we found when we looked at it was that it wasn't the latest version of the risk management strategy that had been updated and was the one going forward for approval. There were some inconsistencies in a number of the risk registers that we reviewed. That was sort of below, that was more sort of the portfolio risk registers. There was incomplete information or out of date information contained in a number of those risk registers, and assurances were still absent from the registers as well. So I think what I've said there in conclusion is, whilst we've noted that there are some improvements that have been made and progress has been made on all of the actions since our 2021 review, there is further work still required to satisfy me that I can push this up into a reasonable, or let's say a positive opinion. So hopefully that just sort of brings to life some of the issues that we found in that review.
Thank you. And I know we've got the risk register later in the agenda, and I noticed that Chris Bolton is there. But I mean, the CPCA has been wrestling with their approach to risk management since the year dot. And part of it is process, and part of it is living and breathing risk management and the leadership of the organization, putting it in its proper place so that it is understood by the organization and its importance. To what extent is it process, and to what extent is it leadership that does not focus minds on it?
Well, I mean, if I may offer a view, I think it's actually a combination of both. I think the frustrating thing from our perspective is just perhaps some of these actions it's perhaps the length of time it's taken to implement some of these actions, given that we're nearly sort of two years on. I think that would be the other frustration. But clearly, there's a bit of a domino effect here. You need to have the new strategy approved to then roll out the training that's based on the new strategy and any changes you may have undertaken. And then obviously that potentially takes time for that training to kick in and people's awareness around the format and content of registers, the regular review, the regular update, if you have introduced, for example, the use of assurances. So I think probably the delay in getting new strategy that and that sort of overall leadership has probably led to some of the other actions not being put in place as quickly as I think we'd have all liked to have seen.
Okay, thank you for that insight. I mean, when I was on the receiving end of internal audit, to me, a good life was getting them off my back, so I answered all the bloody exam questions by the deadline. But I do notice in recent years that things like deadlines tend to not be given the rigour that perhaps good governance would require of it. What are you going to do next? Are you going to look at this again in the next year? I mean, in your next work plan?
Yes, I mean, it would certainly be a conversation I think that we would want to have with Chris, just in terms of our planning meetings for 23, 24, and just say when would be the best timing to come in and do this, because to be fair, what we don't want to do again is come in too early in the year. We'll be led by Chris in terms of the completion of the actions, so that we've given enough time for these things to have been implemented.
The dates for actions in my other spheres of experience would be that the date is agreed between management and the internal auditor. So the date should be one that management says it can deliver to. Is that how it works in the combined authority?
Exactly that. So, sorry, Chair. I mean, obviously, what you don't get is a full copy of the report. So the copy that Chris and colleague officers receive contains the detailed management action that's agreed, the officer responsible, and the implementation date. So all of that information is agreed within each and every one of our final reports.
And what is as clearly was slippage in this one, but is what is, I think my recollection is that you haven't needed to bring to our attention slippage in meeting deadlines. Should we? Is it a problem generally, or do we need more insight from our point of view?
I think the one thing that you do need as a regular agenda item is an update paper on the progress against the implementation. I think this was discussed in the December meeting. I think there's reference to it in the minutes. I think that query was raised either by yourself, Chair, or another councillor on the committee. So I think that is important for you to just receive an update paper in terms of whether it's internal audit reports, internal audit actions, the external auditors, there might be the odd review from the Information Commission or something like that. If it's appropriate for this committee to see that progress is being made, then that is helpful. Clearly, we do a follow-up review as part of our plan of work. So we then independently come to the committee and say, we've looked at a sample of the actions that officers are saying have been implemented. This is our findings, but it's good practice for regular updates to be provided to audit committees through officers.
What is the process that's used by the combined authority to track the implementation of actions recommended by auditors?
Yes, thank you. Chris might want to come in on this, but there is an internal audit action tracker, which is held by the PMO office, and that is regularly taken to the park. So that's the internal officer group performance and risk committee. So it is reviewed on a regular basis at that meeting. So it is monitored.
Well, perhaps we could ask if we could have a paper at the next meeting showing how that is done within the combined authority, and what information goes to park, because I hadn't hitherto realised that it had been an issue. But the impression I'd got was that there was reasonably good performance against deadlines. Chris, you've appeared. Do you want to say anything more?
Yeah, just a brief update. Thank you, Dan, as well, for all your help with all the information going back and forth from the programme office to you. Just a couple of things that jumped out. I mean, I'll cover it in the risk report a little bit later. Absolutely agree with the audit. The one thing that really jumped out was around the comments that you recognised that the work to implement some of the actions is ongoing. There is that delay there. One thing I'll just remind the committee, the responsibility for the sort of programme risk register, corporate risk register, moved across to the programme office around September time last year. And since then, we've really tried to push forward things like training, new risk formats, new templates. And as John mentioned there, around the making the sort of register live. So we review our internal performance and risk committee every month. And we have the process. We'll talk a little bit later about the process of risk coming from sort of projects up to programme, up to portfolio level. So just to reassure the committee, as a programme office, we understand and agree with the audit measure. I would just to sort of remind the committee, the programme office didn't really take on the responsibility for looking after risks until sort of September time last year. And equally, the other point that jumped out was around the timing of the audit. So in the discussions as the audit was going along, it was made very plain that the delivery of the actions associated with the audit were scheduled. So, for example, the training for A&G, we've got training scheduled for next month, risk appetite training, and so on. So the internal auditors are aware that that was, that was all in place and planned.
Okay, thanks very much, Chris. Any other points before we move on? I mean, time is going.
Yeah, I mean, a governance point arises, doesn't it? And we've had this discussion before. Reports going to park, but we're not aware of it. I mean, it's our responsibility to make sure there's proper risk management arrangements in the authority, and I think it would be very, very helpful to have those progress reports, not so that we can. I mean, we understand about the capacity constraints that are now being dealt with and why there are delays, but at least we can be assured that this is been prioritized, attended to, and there's a action schedule and timetable to address these issues. This is absolutely essential. As part of the exam, we have a positive opinion from the internal auditor on risk management. We need that sooner rather than later.
Okay, thank you. Any other? All right, so thank you, Dan, and we will have from officers at the next meeting an insight into how recommendations are managed and what the slippages are and what action is taken.
Chair, could I just mention there was I've also put the updated annual report on your agenda. I wasn't proposing to specifically talk to it. I've added some commentary on page 74, which is a paragraph. I think it was a request and an action following the last meeting. So I wasn't specifically going to talk through that update, but a paragraph has been added as we agreed at the last meeting. There's one final point I wanted to make on the progress report, which I'd removed the paragraph from the progress report, given that we've obviously only got 2 final reports year to date, but I just do think it's pertinent perhaps in January to mention this, given that we're obviously 10 months into the year. Now, we've issued 2 final reports year to date. Obviously, the one on risk management we've just discussed, the data protection deep dive. that I mentioned previously, that obviously also, whilst that was advisory in nature, did have a number of sort of significant findings within that. The other report that's out in draft at the moment, and I would stress it is a draft report, we still need to go through the findings. That also sits as a negative opinion in draft, overemphasizing the fact it's still in draft. But clearly what I need to continue to do is to keep John appraised of the other reviews that are in progress and as they finalise, because clearly I've got 3 reviews sitting there year to date that as things stand will all negatively impact my year-end opinion. So I just felt that was appropriate to mention it at this meeting. Clearly we've still got 5 pieces of work still to deliver that will also inform that opinion, but I thought it would be amiss of me not to just mention that.
Thank you. Is that which topic was that? Core control framework?
Yeah, so the core control framework is one of those reviews in progress. We've got the table at Appendix B on page 61 of your pack. So the draft report's out on the Affordable Housing Grant Programme. 2 reviews in progress, so core control framework and the governance around the net zero hub, and then we've got the other 4 reviews that are scheduled to start imminently. So there's still a number of audits to go that will further inform that opinion, but it's just saying that, look, as things stand, we've got 3 out of 3 reviews that will have impact on my year-end opinion, given the findings we've got year to date.
When will you reach this judgment of Solomon?
I mean, well, typically when all of that field work is finished. So, but the field work should be finished, providing we get all of the required evidence for all of our reviews towards the end of March. So it's around about that time that I could have a view. I think your next committee meeting is scheduled in around that time, so we can certainly provide an update at that meeting in terms of where we're at that point.
That would be helpful, because we're going to take the draft annual report of the committee on the 24th of March. So to have, when we can hold it back a bit, though I'd rather not, because we don't know who's here next year. I never like passing reports where the people have just arrived and didn't live through the pain and joy. So if we could get as much insight, or I'll ask officers to contact you as they're drafting it to try and find a form of words. And as we've discussed before, understanding how unusual these circumstances are for a negative opinion, if that proves to be your judgment, is important. Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Edwina? Sorry, I didn't see you up there.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to speak to. Okay, I just wanted to speak to 2 reports. Sorry, audit reports. I believe 2 that are in draft. Well, one of the ones in draft has to do with the whistleblowing. I just wanted to double check that, and I believe I've explained to this committee in the past that unfortunately we're unable to finalize that or come back with the information that's required by RSM to finalize that, because the comments that are required, we cannot obtain it presently, because the person who's meant to provide that those comments is unwell. So I'll just leave it to that. But that is something that I am mindful of, and as soon as we have those comments, we'll pass them on to RSM. The second report that I wanted to speak to was the data protection or information governance report. I believe we have been exchanging emails with RSM. I think there may be some issues outstanding, but we are on top of that, and you would hear from to Susan Hall, the data protection officer, some of those improvements when she presents the paper on information governance. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Edwina. Dan, did you want to say anything in regard to those remarks?
No, I recognise the position that Edwina has described, and we can certainly react as soon as we're in a position to progress further that one remaining draft report from 21-22. So that's I absolutely understand the position.
Okay, thank you. Shall we leave it there? Thank you very much. So now we go to item 6, which is the external audit plan for 21-22. It's always a timing, isn't it, interesting as we sit in 23. Well, we have to remember that these are very long processes. And we have with us Jacob from Ernst & Young, who's going to talk us through it.
Thank you, Chair. As the Chair says, this is our audit plan for the 21-22 external audit. So this is our first communication and reporting in the sense of our traditional and core audit responsibilities since the conclusion of our 2021 audit. If I take you straight through to page 90, page 90 sets out our key risks for the financial year. The first two risks relate to fraud risks, and these are consistent with prior years. So management sit in the position of being able to override controls, and therefore there is an additional risk there. And for the combined authority, we believe this sits with the REFCUS balances, given the incentive of the authority to recognise expenditure through REFCUS rather than their core expenditure. We then have a new significant risk for the year in respect of the accounting for settlement agreements. The draft accounts, which were published towards the back end of last year, included a provision for settlement agreements. Given the potential estimation here, but also the sensitive nature of the balances, we've deemed this to be a significant risk, which will require additional audit focus. I'll take you on to page 91, which is the remainder of our risks before the final one on page 92. So the top two risks, again, are consistent with previous years. So we have a risk around the group consolidation, given the technical accounting for that, but also increased activity at one of the components, which I'll talk about shortly. We again have a consistent risk on the pension valuations, given the estimation required there and the use of an actuary and the material balances in respect of the authority's pension liabilities. And at the bottom, we have two new risks. So one of these is around the long-term investments that the authority hold with their subsidiaries. The authority have invested money in subsidiaries, and this is about the valuation of that within the authority's balance sheet. The key reason why this is a risk this year and potentially hasn't been in the past is around inflation and other volatility that could impact the value of those assets. And could cause challenges at the bodies. And we also have raised a new inherent risk around mayoral allowance and expenses, given the sensitive nature of this disclosure within the accounts. And then finally, on page 92, as I said, within the subsidiaries, there is increased activity, which has led to a material property, plant and equipment balance. We've therefore raised an inherent risk given the nature of these balances in terms of both valuation, but also the capitalisation of those costs. I'll then take you through to page...
Sorry, could I just pause there in case there's any comments on the
Sure.
risks? Your light may or may not come on. Just give it a go. Maybe if your light goes off, I think maybe try that. Yes.
Thank you,
the only
Chair.
one who can override it.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah. So just on these 3 pages. So should we understand that all of the ones with red boxes and changed from the previous year should say new risk in 21-22, not new risk in 2021, as some of them say?
Yes, that would be correct.
Thank you. I had one further question. Oh yeah, sorry. Just on the pension valuation, can someone remind me which LGPS scheme the combined authority is admitted to? Is it the Cambridgeshire one, or is it the? Okay, it's the Cambridgeshire one. Thank you.
The mayoral allowance, new risk, £567 out of a total expenditure of 141 million. How can that possibly cross any materiality threshold? I mean, that's a little bit, particular, isn't it? What's the motive behind that?
So our risk on this is actually linked to completeness. So yeah, fully appreciate that 567 is a small balance, but our risk is around completeness, so that 567 shouldn't be much higher, which would then be certainly material by nature and of interest to the general public. So yeah, it's not so much the 567 itself, but the risk that should be a much bigger number, or could be a much bigger number.
Thank you. And I've got one question. I hadn't appreciated until you did it in this way, the amounts of money that are involved with the subsidiary companies. And only now has the combined authority set up I think it's a shareholder board, is it? And when we last saw that at our previous meeting, that was only going to meet when it wanted to, and we recommended it was at least annually. But it does seem to me that given the size of these sums here, that I'd ask officers to have a look again at the terms of reference for the shareholder board. Is that the right word? To see that if it adequately requires them to look at these, to take into account these risks. It's trying to join the dots, really. I'm going to get sage advice on my left.
Excellent. Not advice on whether that's a sensible recommendation. It sounds entirely reasonable to me. Just a clarification on that figure that's given in the external audit report or plan. Sorry, that doesn't just include shares in subsidiaries. It also includes several £10 million of local authority treasury management investments, as well as both shares and loans. So it's not quite that large, but it is still a substantial sum.
Okay. Well, then perhaps it's a broader question, isn't it? I mean, how does the combined authority monitor its investments, not just as something in an accounting spreadsheet, but as a managerial corporate matter? So maybe I could broaden that remit, was to also see whether the shareholder board would be a good place to look at other investments that the combined authority makes, to which it still has expectations regarding being repaid, because that's how I interpreted this. They're not grants, they're loans of some sort, I take.
The majority of them are actually equity investments for shares rather than loans, so there's a slight miscommunication in the report. But yes, they are investments,
and they're clearly significant. So could we have advice for the next meeting on the shareholder board's role in this regard? Thank you. Edwina? I can see a hand, but no Edwina.
Yeah. Can you see me?
I can see you now, and your hand.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to respond to your comment about the shareholder board. So yes, the Combined Authority Board approved the establishment of the shareholder board in November, but it's yet to have its first meeting because I'm awaiting nominees to the board. Once that's done, or the final nominee to the board, once that's done, then the board can meet. We report to risk and loans, part of by the Authority Board in November has a clause there which requires that the sets out that the shareholder board would look at borrowing money, granting security, and giving of guarantee. So that will be part of the things that the shareholder board will be looking at. So, looking at borrowing money and all the financial issues basically. So I just wanted to mention that that's already in the terms of reference. And also in the terms of reference, I think I've stated this before, the Audit and Governance Committee will be heavily interacting, or should be interacting, with the shareholder board. The shareholder board will be making reports to this committee and consulting with this committee as well. So I just wanted to speak to that and give assurances to you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Edwin. That's helpful. So if the action list could show, we'd like an update, or we'll do, on when and who the shareholder board is for our next meeting, or when the expectations are. We just need to keep this in focus until it's reached a steady state. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much, Jacob. Your next bit there.
Thank you. So I'll now take you on to page 95 of our report, which is around the designation of this audit as a close monitoring engagement. So this means that EY now see this as a higher risk audit, given the significant value for money weakness. So this audit has been elevated to close monitoring. As such, we have responded to this elevated risk through the key 4 bullet points in our audit response. And some of this, all of this is reflected throughout the plan, including in the risk section above, but also in our team section later, and our materiality section later as well. But I just thought I'd flag it on this page, given the impact it has throughout the plan. The next page talks through our value for money work to date. So we don't have any specific updates on value for money as such. Our detailed risk planning is underway, and we're not reporting any new matters to the committee, but we do expect that the matters reported to date would constitute a significant weakness in arrangements for the 21-22 financial year, and that will be reflected in our final reporting. There are further details around this in the audit plan within section 3, but I wasn't planning on going into those in any particular detail, given they've been communicated to this committee in previous committees. The next few slides are some further detail around our response to the audit risks discussed earlier. So if I take you through to page 111, which is our materiality. So as mentioned, based on the close monitoring designation, our materiality levels this year are lowered. So we are now at a level of 1% of gross expenditure for our planning materiality, which represents 1.412 million. And we have also lowered our performance materiality threshold to 50%, where in the past this was 75%. Our performance materiality is the key figure in determining the level of work that we do. And with this, we've also lowered our audit differences threshold to 71,000. This is the level to which, if an error is identified, it will be reported back to this committee.
So, Jacob, can I just be clear? You've lowered these levels because of the closer monitoring, or is this is just for the CPCA?
Yeah, so this is purely for the combined authority based on the close monitoring designation and the deemed higher level of risk of the engagement. And finally, we've also set specific materiality for a number of the sensitive items, including mayor or members' allowances, expenses, but also related party transactions and other disclosures around officers' remuneration and exit packages. Then take you through to page 1.
Michael, sure.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder, it's just that we've been requested specifically to confirm our understanding and agreement of these levels. I wonder if we could just pause for a moment before we move off materiality. I very much appreciate the rationale that we've looked at this through so many different lenses now, but clearly the governance weaknesses identified, it does make sense to consider whether changes to materiality are appropriate. So I appreciate why it's been done. I suppose my only concern is there is a trade-off here where by lowering the materiality threshold, one imagines that's going to mean that the work's going to take longer. You're going to need to look at everything in significantly more detail than would otherwise be the case. It's going to mean that the planning is going to take longer, the field work is going to take longer, and the value of your findings is going to diminish the further from the period in question it takes place. And clearly, the rest of the combined authority is now moving at speed through a kind of detailed sort of improvement process. And I wonder, have you considered the effect of reducing these materiality thresholds on the rate at which you can work and the rate at which you can report back? And actually, have you considered that trade-off and whether this is actually the appropriate level to drop it to?
So I think firstly, I guess it's important to remember ultimately, as the external auditor, who our sort of key stakeholder is, and that is the general public. So yes, this does mean that the work will take longer. However, this is the level that we think is appropriate given the additional interest that the general public may have in the authority at this time. Yes, we have thought about what this extra work will look like, and that's linked to the timetable, which comes slightly later. Yeah, so yes, it is extra work, but it does feel like the appropriate level given, as I say, our sort of close monitoring designation.
And has this been done in consultation with the?
So our materiality levels will be set by us based on our view of the perception of the general public. So it's not something that we would be guided on by the authority.
Thank you. In response to this this change in designation, you've changed the staffing structure to include some senior figures from within your organisation to provide some assurance over quality and completeness, and that is welcome. But if you're reducing the materiality and increasing the amount of work, should you not also be allocating a larger number of junior staff to the team as well, so that the work can be completed in a timely manner? Guys, I mean, the risk that I'm worried about here is that this audit is already this is commencing at a later part in the year than one would normally expect, and that's then going to knock on into future audits as well. And I wouldn't want to add to all the other governance issues that this organization is facing an external audit process that's running, a year, 18 months behind where it should be. That's not going to be in the best interest of either the external auditors or the organization or DLUC or anyone else. So in addition, I mean, it may just be because you wanted to highlight the extra experience you're bringing on board, but are you also filling out the team with more junior staff as well to do the detailed work that this will require?
Yes, so absolutely, and I think one of our later slides has some more details on the sort of key members of the team, and in past reports you probably would have seen maybe 2 names on that. This year I think there's 4, maybe 5. But yes, below that as well, we'll clearly have support from an increased team of junior members to complete the work initially as well. So there's additional review processes, but also additional members to complete the fact that there will be additional work. Fully understand your point around is this additional time and pressure needed? I think we'd all like to say no, and we would like to do less and stick with where we were. But I think this is our response to the additional risk, and therefore ultimately for us to be able to provide the same opinion, we need to do a higher level of work given the higher level of risk, and this is our response to that. As much as we would like to do the same amount of work as we've done in previous years to reach the same opinion, given the heightened risk, we feel we need to do more work to get to that same opinion.
The 1st June letter, which I've got in front of me, is really calling for urgent action. The combined authority has responded to that call for urgent action, and as you'll have seen this morning, is working at pace. I think Councillor Atkins has raised a very powerful point that the external audit also needs to be working at pace to keep up and to deal with all the to prevent the issues and risks that Councillor Atkins highlighted as a possibility. And I think it would be good for this committee to confirm that concern formally with the external auditor, so that's on the record. So we want to be assured that there isn't going to be egregious delays with the reporting back on these matters. I just wanted to raise another point, which is in the letter, it raises issues around leadership capacity, the requisite skills, knowledge and experience, and around safeguarding. How are you addressing those issues that have been raised in the external audit? Because I don't see any reference to that. I may have not seen it, but I haven't. Could you please advise me on that?
So I think it's important to disaggregate the two. So this is our standard core audit responsibilities. The additional reporting that we've done over the past few months is additional audit powers. And therefore this plan itself is primarily focused on our core audit responsibilities to give a true and fair opinion over the financial statements at 31st of March 2022. This reflects and considers the wider environment of the authority in terms of determining our risks, materiality, but this is not designed to provide a response to that letter. It's not designed to resolve or conclude on other matters. The detail of that will be included within the value for money commentary. So when we get to the conclusion stage of this audit, we'll be issuing our value for money commentary. But I would like to say that that is not, because that is in sort of isolation, we would be keen to report to the committee on other matters as soon as we are able. So I wouldn't like to say we're waiting until everything is finished until we're going to communicate further in respect of the letter and other concerns. But it is important to sort of recognise, I think, that this is a separate piece of work and our core piece of audit work, rather than a response to our other reporting, which has been additional over the past few months.
Going back a bit, I think my sense that the two comments we've had regarding speed is the position of this committee, that bearing in mind the injunction from Whitehall to get on with it, and the need for an assurance from the external auditor that they're going to put in the resources to maintain what they said they were going to do. And I would like you to convey that to your organisation. And if there's anything that can be done to speed up the timeline by looking at it, then we would welcome feedback on that. But I'm sorry, there's another point, Ambrose. Yep, you're on.
Oh, good. Disagree with you, Chair. I agreed with everything else you've said today,
But you disagree with it.
But I disagree with your summary.
Okay, good.
I believe because of the scathing report we had from the internal audit, that what Ernst & Young is actually setting up to do, I think is a must. I appreciate they're putting more staff in and so forth to keep the momentum going, but I think it has to be done, and no short way.
And I'm sorry if that was the impression I gave. That was not. No, the sense was about the speed of doing it, not, as we've heard quite clearly, it isn't in our mandate to decide what external auditors feel is appropriate given the obligations they have in their duty. And I didn't mean, if you inferred that from what I'm said, I'm sorry. It is only about, can more be done to speed up the process, or at least make sure the external auditor properly resources themselves, bearing in mind the other pressures on the organisation and the need to satisfy another stakeholder called Whitehall. Is that reassured you? Yeah, okay. Sorry, that was I didn't mean to go. And I'm glad you disagree away. I'm very happy to be disagreed with. It's better that we all go together and well, that's why we have these debates, isn't it? And make sure there's no uncertainty in our minds. Can we allow Jacob to move on a bit now?
It is a bit of a. It goes back to our earlier discussion about, well, who's going to who can we look at, sort of independent third party who's going to say to our examiners, this element of the Ernst & Young concern about value for money is now being addressed, which relates to all those staffing matters that are highlighted in that report. It's not in the internal auditors program. It's not in the external auditors program. How we know we're going to have an effective improvement program for that that's checked by a third party. It seems a gap in the whole process that's been put in front of us this morning.
I think that's probably opposite. You heard all the debate that's gone on today about what the exam question is that we have to answer, or the compliant authority has to answer. Your separate process of the accounts and all of that is a technical thing. The value for money judgment is, how does that work from?
That is 9 months in the past or so. And we will be raising that there were significant weaknesses within the authority at that time and for that financial year. Aside from that, in terms of our other reporting duties and responsibilities, we do have a work programme in terms of responding to our letter, following that up, and working with the authority to see how that is addressed over time. That is a separate piece of work that is being worked up in conjunction with the sort of core external audit and with all the same team members that we've talked about, as well as some other internal specialist support. So I'm not able to give a timeline on that today, but I do know it's being worked on currently and is very high, clearly on the priority list for us. But yeah, it doesn't form part of this as part of our 21-22 audit.
Because it started after.
We could have a timeline for that, Chair. That would be helpful, and we'd certainly like to see that come to this committee.
So whenever we've asked your colleagues about this, it's not been easy to get an comprehensible answer. So are you able to take away that we would like a timeline for the issues arising from the letter that was written to me in June 22 about value for money, because it was on the value for money aspects that prompted that intervention. And it would be very helpful at our next meeting to have an improved understanding of how a judgment will be arrived at and when. Is that a fair task, Jake?
Yeah, yes, Chair. I think that's fine. I think the only thing I would reflect on is that it is a constantly changing position. Clearly, there's been more events or more communication from DLUC this week. That does mean everything. This does take time, and it takes time for us to get it right as well. But more than happy to take that away.
Okay. I mean, my analogy with all of this is the plant will never grow if you're always taking it out of the soil to have a look at the roots. And all of this work and this heightened need to protect the public's interest in all of this, which is unarguable. But there has to be a judgment sometime. This isn't a formal position. That's just my view, that there's, when you get into a hiatus like this, you sometimes create as much damage by looking at the roots as you do by standing back and let the shoots of recovery grow. I will wax, not for the minutes, by the way, any of that. But that's how it strikes me sometimes. And we just try to, you've got to think about the plant and are you doing, is this the right treatment, or can you make the treatment less intrusive? Again, that's not a formal position. It's just how it strikes me. You don't disagree. Okay. Right. Can we, Jacob, move on now?
Thank you, Chair. If I now move on to page 117, and we did talk about the group audit slightly earlier, but just to show that we have increased the scope of our work at Propco 2, Peterborough R&D Property Company. So this reflects the material, property, plant and equipment balance that sits within their accounts. So we are likely to ask their own external auditors to do some additional procedures to make sure that we're happy there and consider our own work on that company specifically. So that's an increase in scope on that component. As we talked about already on page 120, we have considered our audit team, and this is a beefed up, I guess, audit team to support the additional risks we've identified. And on page 124, we have talked about timelines. So in our introduction to this, we do reflect that the authority did publish its draft financial statements after the due date, which has impacted our original plan for the timeline. We are going to work closely with the finance team to identify a core audit window within this, but this timeline reflects the additional need for review processes in line with the additional team. So that is an extended period of April to August, but we will be looking to work with finance to find a sort of key window within that period for our key testing. And I think for today, for me, that's everything, unless there are any further questions on the rest of the report.
We were asked to note the item. We've given a couple of tasks for external auditors to take away.
Thank you, Chair. So with your draft timetable, we're looking to kind of sign off, hopefully the audit in around the kind of September, October time of this year. That puts us pretty squarely about 12-ish months behind where the authority would ideally be. Do the external auditors, do you have a sense of how you will kind of catch up after that point to get us kind of back on the kind of timescales that we should be operating on?
So I guess some context around the PSA contract. So you may have seen in the press that the PSA contract for the years 24, 25 onwards has been announced, and audit responsibilities have been announced. So EY do retain the responsibility for this audit, but there are lots of movements in there, and that's being considered as part of how we can catch up. But I think it's also important to reflect that part of this is down to authorities. As I say, the draft accounts were late, which meant we couldn't start our audit in the original timeline. Now that's for a number of reasons. And I think it shows the additional pressure that is on finance teams within the sector as well. So I don't want to get into a sort of blame game by any stretch, but there is a lot of pressure in the sector, and this is not unique to the combined authority by any stretch. So yes, there is work going on as to how we can catch up, but that is work that's happening at audited bodies such as the combined authority, as well as at the audit firms. So this is not a EY issue, it's not a CPCA issue. There are some specifics in there that have pushed things back, but certainly there's a lot going on wider than just in this room around this. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, I would just note, obviously, so the draft financial statements were 4 months after the due date, but yet the end result of all this is that we're going to be, like I say, more like 12 months behind where we're due to be. If the I guess my concern that coming out of this would be if the risks and the pressures and the complexity of the combined authority is such that you know audit audit is taking more than a year to audit a year, then it's never going to catch up and it's just going to fall further and further behind, and that will itself then become a kind of governance risk. But I think we can leave that issue perhaps for later in the year.
I think we should note that, though, because presumably they would have to be sequential. You couldn't start the next audit before you'd finished this audit, or could you?
We could do some limited work, but not really, no.
Okay, we should note that too. Do you have any comments from the finance side for the combined authority on all of this?
No, I think we kind of recognise Jacob has said, and obviously we'll be talking to them in greater detail about the planning of the audit. And yes, I think probably one of the things we would have liked to talk about would have been how far we could to merge or to align the audits of 21-22 with potentially the audit of 22-23, which we would have been looking to do that audit at the time that you'll be doing the previous audit. So that's something that we might want to consider. I guess the other thing in terms of materiality is that the concerns that the EY letter from June last year raised were to do with value for money and less to do with the financial statements. So it's whether or not it's so appropriate to have an increased materiality levels when the risks were elsewhere and not in the financial statements. So that might be something that they could consider, which obviously if we could have an appropriate level of materiality might ease some of the timing pressures on the audit. But thank you.
I went to staff college. When we had to do exercises, we got this scenario set out on white paper, and the answers after you'd done your essay came in on pink paper. And one of the things we used to say is, don't fight the white. We are in the situation you're in, and I think we've heard both of you, members of the committee, if that is the external auditor's judgment, that's the white. So I think I'd ask you to note the comments from the Chief Finance Officer and report them back. And should there be any reflection, we'd like to know. But otherwise, I'm assuming what you put before us is what will happen. And I was going to do it later, but I'll do it now. One of the reasons that the accounts were late, because there was a single point of failure in the expertise available to the combined authority. We'll hear at a later item on the agenda that finance work will be deferred for a different, but another single point of failure because the work can't be done. And I think we would like your support. This is a concern, that resilience. We do need the authority to be looking as to how they can improve their resilience, because Lady Bracknell wouldn't be pleased with it happening twice. It now happened twice. There must be something. When I talk informally to other people in the accounting world, they are not convinced that we should be prey to a single point of failure. I know these are personnel issues, but business continuity is what we're talking about. I'm not sure whether it's an action I think perhaps we would like a small insight for the next meeting, if colleagues are happy, about the challenges and solutions for an accounting team which is small and busy. What is the business continuity arrangement? Because whilst one can be pragmatic, it's a worry. Do I see nodding of heads? Yeah. Okay. We don't need a lot. We're just something on paper. The next thing that gives you perspective and how the combined authority can avoid this, because it's tough stuff. But maybe there's. I don't know what the answer is, but we ought to see it. Sorry, that was off piste, but it was something I was going to raise at the next item, but it seemed about appropriate to raise it now. Is there anything else, Jake?
No, not from me, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. You've done very well with the incoming. I don't think we like it, but that is the white. So there we go. Right, thank you very much. Now, it's just gone 12 o'clock. We've been at it for 2 hours. We haven't made a lot of progress, and we haven't been chewing the fat unnecessarily, apart from my bon mots. I apologise. We've got climate change, risk, code of conduct, information, constitution. Do we want a leg stretch, or we just want to plough on? And then a leg stretch. Okay. And I think it's incumbent on us all and the presenters to pedal a bit harder, because I'd like to be out of the room by 1 o'clock, because I've got jobs to do. Okay. Well, the deadline will get thrown out by 1:30. I'd like us to withdraw peacefully at around 1 o'clock. So, well, we can have a break if you'd like after this one. No. All right. It's the old ones. Okay. Okay. Well, we'll make it 3 minutes and time to go to the loo, but we'll do this one first. So what we have got now is the climate action plan, which we've chewed over this to get it our understanding of how this has been addressed. And that's what you're going to quickly tell us about.
Thank you, Chair, and I appreciate that I'm in the way of your comfort break, so I will keep it as short as possible. You've asked for an update on the governance around the climate working of the authority. I've set out in the report our current governance, which is we have a working group set up, which is a multi-partner working group, which has been steering the climate action plan delivery, but ultimately that reports back into the combined authority and to the board itself. So we will be taking a annual update to the board at the March meeting. The report as an appendix includes some tweaks to the terms of reference of the working group that they've been discussing to bring it more up to date with the fact that they've moved from a strategy development phase into a delivery phase. I think just a couple of other points to raise as part of your consideration is that on Wednesday the corporate strategy went through, and one of the 4 priorities is resilient communities, under which we would see the bulk of the climate activities directly fitting. It's on the corporate risk register. And also, I note the comments that the committee made on the new procurement policy around the environmental aspects, and we'll be looking at that in terms of picking that up. But in terms of the report in front of you, you've asked for it in terms of governance. It's a noting report, but obviously happy to answer queries.
Thank you very much. Any questions, comments?
Thank you. Sorry, having promised this would be a short item, I do have one question. If I've understood correctly, in the new proposed governance arrangements for the combined authority, there will be a new thematic committee which will have climate as a key part of its remit. If I've understood these machinations correctly, do you see this sort of partnership group and board changing in response to that?
So I think you're right. That's due to go back to board. It was deferred from this week, but there would be the Environment Committee under which this activity would report to. We'll look at whether that means any of the membership of the working group might change, but my view is that we would still need that multi-sector partnership, because a key part of our climate work is recognizing that we're delivering in partnership, and it's about corralling a whole range of activity and seeing where the Combined Authority adds value to that.
So thank you for the report. A few members that I think are missing for Cambridge Water. So the water industry is only represented by Anglia Water. UK Power Networks, a renewables generator. Oh, someone from the renewables? Oh, they are there. Sorry. And Greater Cambridge Partnership. So there's a question about those, the members. And the purpose of the board being to align collective powers, resources and skills. If this governance regime is going to work, what arrangements are there in place for the pooling of powers and resources? Are all the parties committed to doing that? The question is, where's the money coming from to address the scale of the problem? Because on the risk register, this gets a score of 25, which is the highest score. On one axis, it's almost, the risk is it's climate change is almost certain, and it has a monumental impact. So this is really important. So we've got to have a very robust regime that's going to put some serious resource behind all of the issues that need to be addressed. So is it going to be go beyond being a conference kind of board or partnership, or is it going to really exercise great leverage and do monumental things in response to the monumental problem?
That's just an easy question.
I'll deal with the membership first while I compose my thoughts on the second point. So yes, in terms of those you've mentioned, the representative on there from Anglian Water actually covers a role with Water Resources East, which gives us an overview, and we certainly are talking to all the infrastructure partners as part of that. And similarly, a number of the elected members who are on that partnership are also part of the Greater Cambridge Partnership. So there is a feed-in of activity there. Big challenge, as you've identified, in terms of resourcing the whole shift into a low carbon economy. And I think it's very much the working group brings together organisations that themselves have committed action on climate activity. So all of the councils have their own strategies or approaches to doing that. We have identified the challenge around attracting more investment into low carbon economy, and that's one of the strands of the work of the action plan. I think it's difficult for us through that working group to have commitment to specific resources. It's about working as partnerships to identify opportunities. And as we know, a lot of the future funding currently is expected through bidding processes from central government. And so it's about being ready where we can to deliver very good projects to draw that down.
Is it correct for me to say then that you will be addressing the wicked issues relating to climate change. So ones which are not responsibility for a single organisation, but the responsibility for everybody. And so the interventions could mitigate against work being carried out by all the different authorities over and over again, the same thing. So there needs to be a lot of advanced work on, for example, smart energy grids, water resource management, the grid reinforcements. So these things that cut across the boundaries that, unless there's this coordinating framework and coordinating partnership, will probably not get addressed. But they're crucial if we're going to make the zero carbon target.
Yeah, that's very much the focus of the work, because we recognize that organizations have their own action plans, and it would be somewhat duplication to just repeat all that in a document because it covered Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. It is very much about identifying collaborative work. So there is work exploring local area energy planning. We're feeding into the work on water resources, but it's exactly those more challenging cross-organizational things. So very much a focus on the building blocks, such as the work that we as an authority are doing on the electric vehicle charging strategy under the local transport plan. That will be overarching and will impact on a whole range of organisations. So it's very much the focus on those wicked issues.
Thank you, Ed. I mean, that's very helpful and interesting, but it's the what is being doing strays somewhat from the governance question, which is ours. I think if I go back to where we started on this 2 or 3 years ago, we found it quite difficult to get the terms of reference for what was going on in the environment. We put forward recommendations that it should be on the risk register, which was not palatable at the time, but that was done. I now put it into, it's now folded itself into business. And unless there's a governance issue, I don't see us need to look at it in the particular in any way we look at any other of the committees. And I think what is really pleasing is the way that this structure has been put in place, and it's very much in tune with the criticisms or responding to the criticisms of the combined authority of not being a collaborative, doesn't have a partnership way of working. So I think we welcome it. We can monitor it through the risk register, but I don't think there's a need for you to report back to us again unless we ask. Thank you very much. Okay, that wasn't fast peddling. Anyway, 12:15. Can we pause for 3 minutes, please? And you are only allowed, for those who need to go, and it should be the old ones first, to the loo. whether we should defer the information governance update until the next meeting because it's not time critical. But I did notice in my own reading there's probably things we'd like to talk about, and just focus on risk register, code of conduct, constitution, and work program. Would people be happy with that? Okay. So it is now 20 past. So we've now got the risk register, Chris, and bearing in mind our earlier discussion, the more focused you can be, the better. Thank you. You're on mute. You're on mute. We can't hear you. That's better.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, start again. Focused.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm conscious of the time and the earlier discussion. So I'll do an update on the risk management progress today, particularly taking into account the recent internal audit report that was on earlier. And what we'll also do as well is quickly look at the top 5 risks and a summary of the movements of the risk register. So if I could just sort of fly through the background, what I'd like to do is concentrate on the internal audit in particular and the number of recommendations that came forward. So there were 6 recommendations that came forward, all medium priority ones. Some of them were touched on earlier by Dan. Just to give you an update with regard to progress in implementing said actions, bearing in mind the information that the Programme Office only took on the responsibility for risk in the corporate risk register back in September. The first one was around risk management strategy. It needs to be updated. The risk management strategy we've included that as part of the improvement plan, the improvement work, particularly to do with work stream E and performance management. We'd be looking to take that back to board, probably looking after March now. We need to understand, some of the improvements that we're going to be making, these actions in particular around training. Also with regards to the risk appetite, that exercise hasn't happened in the last couple of years. So we've recently received some dates from our internal auditors to allow us to run that risk appetite session, including some dates that I'll share with Joanna after this with regards to the development session with you all as well. I know you want to look at risk reporting in particular and also how risk appetite works. So those couple of actions there, they're in progress. Some of the actions around action owners, target scores, risk register content, I absolutely agree. There's gaps in those areas. That's part of the reason for making sure that all risk owners, so the executive team, directors, right through to program managers, project managers, internally with the subsidiary companies and with any of our constituent or authorities, will be trained up into sort of best practice in how they deliver risk. We all use the same risk template now. We need to make sure that that's common right across all the partners as much as possible. Assurance wise, absolutely, we need to make change there. So just for everyone's benefit, when you're talking about assurance, it's sort of 3 sort of areas. You've got assurance at a functional sort of department level. Also, another sort of organisational oversight. For example, it might be HR providing assurance. It might be, the Programme Office, and of course you have independent assurance as well. So there's, no disagreement from the Programme Office with regards to the partial assurance. I'm pleased that the auditors took into account the direction of travel, and I hope that the committee can see that that's happening. From my point of view, I'm pleased with the progress that we've made. I think with regards to implementing the outstanding actions, I have every confidence they'll be done by April. So Q4 this over the next couple of months. Chair, would you like me to go into talk briefly about the risks? The top 5 risks, they haven't changed from last month's reports when we came on the 2nd of December. They need to be updated, particularly there's one with regards to the strategy gap. Obviously, given approval of the sort of joint corporate strategy on Wednesday, that will need to change. So again, I'm happy to answer any questions.
No, I think that's fine. An introduction, Chris. I'll open it to comments or questions. Maybe you've clean boulders. Okay. Well, it's, to my mind, the way you're presenting this is much more helpful, particularly the focus on the risks. And we welcome the progress that is being made to try and to meet all the concerns identified by the internal auditors. In your position, to what extent are you confident that the organisation is behind this risk management endeavour?
I think it's not just personal opinion, it's sort of the evidence of how risks are treated now. Now we have the forum where we look at them, monthly. Equally, you can see, the risk register itself is much more current. You'll see things like inflation on there. I'm thinking sort of going back to the improvement process, and you'll see on the earlier report, the earlier update, there was, you won't see it on the risk register, last month's risk register, but this month we've added a risk around some of the chief exec's worries around the senior management sort of transition. So obviously interim members of staff at the moment, going out to permanent recruitment, they may well have a different way of thinking around how we improve. So again, that risk is put on the risk register straight away, whereas previously you might have waited for a month or something like that. We need to sharpen up how risks come from projects to programs. Now, at the moment, we do look at the corporate risk register monthly in detail. The individual sort of program level ones, from sort of transport through to business, they look at their ones. I think there is there's legs in actually getting a closer look at that executive team level. But compared to let's say 6 months ago, I think it has improved. Am I wholly confident 100% is great? No. I think we made really good progress. I think by the time it comes to the next audit, I'd be confident the score would be much better, would be positive. I don't think you're ever going to get 100%, but I know that there's been support from the executive, from the chief exec, right through the executive directors. They're supportive of what we're doing. Equally, they're providing resource to allow us to do this work, and I'm not sure that was the case previously.
Thank you very much. Do we get a report from you at every meeting now?
I think it's supposed to be quarterly, but I'm very happy to come along as instructed.
Well, I don't see any need for one at our next meeting. We'll stick with quarterly and get all the things done that external audit want you to do, and we'll be very happy. But good. No, we note the progress. I think the candor of your description of how you find the work is reassuring. Thanks very much indeed. Oh, sorry, I've got a note.
Just one thing there, Chris. I think your exam mark has been identified, which is get positives on these audits. It's quite a simple one. It's quite clear, and I just think that you're on it, and that's your destination. That's your direction of travel. So it's very pleasing to see all this work that's been undertaken. So yeah, we just want to hear the positives coming through. And I think the other point is about those is so difficult to measure, but it's about having a risk management culture across the organization and embedded in the organization. And that was very much part of the work that you're doing. It is quite a challenging task, that. But I think that's when we know we're going to be okay, is when everybody understands and uses it as a sort of standard operating procedure as their risk management. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Don't, Chris, misinterpret that. Doesn't mean the ANG is going soft because it's being welcoming and praising. But you're on. I think you convinced us you're on the right track. Just keep at it. Thank you. Till next time.
Thank you.
Okay, we now go to item 9, which is Code of Conduct, which the monitoring officer, Edwina, is going to introduce. Are you there, Edwina?
Yes, I am, Chair.
Ooh. Good. The noise was
Can you
very
see me?
large. Yeah. Somebody's got the volume up at maximum, but I'm sure we'll sort that out. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning, members. So the purpose of this report is just to provide an update to members on code of conduct complaints, or, well, general complaints, whistleblowing complaints that have been made in the last, usually should be within the municipal year, but I joined this authority in July, and I'm not sure there's ever been a report to this committee. And what I am used to is proper governance, is to bring these sort of reports to the Audit and Governance Committee, so you're aware of what's going on with regard to code of conduct complaints and whistleblowing, and how you could intervene in some of those instances, and look at member conduct. So that's why this report is before you. It's really to provide an update. I have set out in the report that there have been 4 complaints so far. Those 4 complaints were made before I joined the authority in July, but like I explained earlier, I do not believe these were reported to ANG before I joined the authority. So that's why those 4 complaints have been brought to your attention. And like I said in the report, 2 of those, the reports relate to 2 members. Unfortunately, because of data protection issues, I'm not able to mention the names of the members. The reason for that is because until a matter is decided, so that until there's a determination on a code of conduct investigation, the member is entitled to protection from exposure. The reason is because, you know, I might determine, or an external investigator might determine, that there isn't a case to answer, if I can put it that simply. So, you know, that they haven't breached the code of conduct. But if before that decision is made, the details of the member has been publicized, then the authority runs the risk of being challenged, or if the member is very egregious about it, may decide to even institute proceedings against the authority. But what I can say is, I think one of those, I mean, has sort of been mentioned in the EY letter, so I suppose that's kind of in a way out there. But the other one, a decision has not been reached. I'm hoping to make a decision next month on that. And after that, I will bring the report to this committee. It might be dealt with in a closed session, as I said in the report, depending on the outcome of the investigation. And it might be that it is dealt with in the open without the details of the member being mentioned, even if there has been a breach, because there isn't a policy here of publishing decisions. So I will leave it there. Sorry, the final point I do want to make is If you note in this item and the item on the Constitution, there is a duplication of documents, and I think I ought to explain that. So the social media protocol and the officer monitoring officer protocol really should be in the constitutional report, which it is, because ultimately it will go into the Constitution. However, it is closely linked to code of conduct issues. So for example, social media protocol, they're quite useful for members, and a member could be accused of a breach of the social media protocol, which would then be dealt with under the code of conduct. Also, with regard to code of conduct, the monitoring officer protocol is quite useful, especially for this committee. So you can support your monitoring officer, and you can, make suggestions as to how monitoring officer relationship is conducted in the authority. So that's the final point I will make, and I will leave it there, and I'm happy to take questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Edwina. Well, we are asked to give our support to these two protocols, as well as discussing other items. So please bear that in mind in your questioning. And on my left.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm happy to support these two protocols. They're remarkably readable documents, and I think they'll be of benefit. One issue which I think we've raised before is this use of the word member. I find problematic and unclear as to whether it's board members, or any kind of local councillor or politician serving on any of the committees. And it's only going to get more confusing in the new in the brave new world if it is ultimately approved, when there will be representatives from constituent authorities on these new thematic committees who will be making decisions that have been delegated by the board. So we're then going to have kind of three categories of councillors. It's going to be those of us serving on regulatory committees, those serving on the board, and those serving on thematic committees. And at the moment, unless it is the intention that members refers just to all of those equally, but it strikes me that in some places really it means board members, and perhaps in others it might mean everyone. And it's going to be important, those of us on this committee, we need guidance as to what rules and protocols we should be following, and what's relevant to us and what isn't. And so just repeating that plea to just be really clear about who is being held to what standards and for what reasons, and how different sort of politicians, as it were, on different committees need to interpret these rules. But other than that, I'm very happy with these.
Did you want to comment on? I mean, I think that was asking for a sort of definition of to whom it applies.
Yes, and I do take Councillor Atkins' points. Thank you for that, Councillor Atkins. I did think about it after the last ANG, but I think these were published sort of straight after, so I apologise. It can be amended. However, what I have thought of doing is to insert in brackets members include, and then set out everyone. So that would include members of constituent authorities, board members, etc. That's my intention, but I do take the point, and I will make that with the chair before it's inserted into the Constitution. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Others? On your opening remarks about we hadn't seen this before, I mean, normally the figures are smuggled in at the last annex of our annual report, and we've never had. I think we did ask once, but maybe things got in the way. I think it is very welcome that at least annually we have a summation of issues like this for the record. You mentioned in your introduction whistleblowing, but I don't think I found it in any of the words. Is whistleblowing and complaints, are they synonymous, or are you there? frozen.
No, they're not. So, oh my goodness.
Yeah, you're back now. You're back now.
Yeah, sorry. No, whistleblowing and complaints are not synonymous. But the whistleblowing that occurred before I joined the authority and had been concluded way before I joined the authority. So I didn't think that I needed to put that in. I felt that perhaps that had been reported to this committee previously, but if that's not the case, then I apologize for that. I'm able to report on these because they're still ongoing. And that's the reason why, those whistleblowing matters are not included in this report. But normally, like I said earlier, should be reported on. That was why I made that comment. But if that's not been reported to the committee previously,
I mean, I was just trying to catch up. I think what we need is an optimum.
I think this concluded in May. I can bring it to the committee.
So I think the technology got in the way there. No, I just think now that you've started us on this journey, I'd ask you to, with the officers, to regularise this by putting it in the work plan at the optimum time in each annual cycle, in the knowledge that I know that anything that's untoward and important in between, we would be alerted. So are we happy to support these two protocols as presented in this paper? Okay, so thank you very much on that. And Edwina, I think your next item is revisions to the Constitution. And I was going to ask you for feedback from the board, but I understand the board didn't take the previous work that we did last fortnight.
No, they didn't. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. No, so the two items that came to this committee on the 17th were deferred to the March meeting. So yes, unfortunately, I can't give you any feedback. But firstly, I need to apologize because the financial regulations that were supposed to be part of this report have not been provided to this committee. And the reason for that is that, unfortunately, the finance officer who is dealing with that part of the Constitution has been unwell for the last 2 weeks with COVID. So unfortunately, we weren't able to bring it before the board, and I do apologize for that. However, I have referred to the other two protocols, the social media protocol and the monitoring officer protocol, and there's an additional protocol, which is the standards committee hearing protocols. If you have a look at that protocol, you will note that it's basically the same as the training that was provided on the 17th. It's just really codifying it into the Constitution so that should there be a standards hearing before this committee, everyone's fully aware of the procedure and there's no confusion as to what the process should take. I have also attached as Appendix 1, and then as Appendix 2, the current Constitution as it is, and the amended Constitution for your ease. So unless there are any questions, I will leave it at that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Edwina. I don't know whether you were listening in earlier, but on the question of resilience in the financial team, I've asked John to give us some insight of the challenges at our next meeting.
I did hear that, Chair.
Okay. So, comments, questions? Ground into the dust. Are we happy? So we support and recommend the revisions that have been put in front of us. Yes. Are we happy to do that? Yep. Okay. Right. We've done our duty. Then you've got the support you needed and the recommendation, Edwina. Thank you. So we've done rather better. So we won't get Sue back. We'll just go on. So item 12 is the work programme, which is page 273. Has anybody got, remembering that we looked at it in some detail last time, any comments or any omissions they've found or things we should be doing that's not there? Or are we happy to take it? No comments. Right, good, thank you. So that brings us to the date of the next meeting, which is the 24th of March. And that's our last meeting of the civic year. And so we will be tabling, amongst other things, our annual report as best we can. Thank you very much indeed. I think we've had a good dialogue and debate. And I think the earlier conversations, particularly on the improvement plan, were valuable. I can notice that somebody's got his finger on the button.
Yes, sorry. In the work programme, the date of the next meeting is given as the 31st of March.
Was it? Thank you.
But you might just want to check which of those dates is it.
Did you notice? Did you hear that? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I went to, I was doing a meeting yesterday in London and 3 people came an hour and a half late because they hadn't noticed the change of time. So it's always good to get the date and the time right. Okay. Thanks very much. That's the end. Thank you.